So imagine this, it's the dead of winter in 1450. A storm howls across the English countryside, wind battering the shutters, snow piling against the wooden doors. Inside, the hearth still glows from the day's last fire, the stones around it, faintly humming with stored warmth. A few heated pocket stones rest near the bed. Heavy curtains drape over the sleeping area like a second skin, and beneath the floor, hot rocks slowly radiate their fading energy into the bones of the room. And somehow, it's warm. Not luxurious, but survivable. Even comfortable. And yet, this entire system, this web of thermal not because it stopped working, not because it was inefficient, but because we were promised something better. The Industrial Revolution rolled in like a thunderstorm, coal-fired, ironclad, and full of swagger. New technologies boasted speed, ease, automation. Modern heating systems removed the need for community fires, hand warmers, or thermal architecture. Central furnaces and later radiators gave the illusion of mastery over winter. But in our rush toward mechanized comfort, something essential was lost, because the medieval approach to warmth wasn't just technological. It was ecological, architectural, even spiritual. It worked with the environment, not against it. It was a system rooted in slowness, precision, observation and, perhaps most importantly, community. You see, warmth in the Middle Ages wasn't privatized. It wasn't something you bought in kilowatts or subscribed to with an energy provider. It was something you shared, maintained, passed on. Heating a house was a conversation between stone, fire, animal, and human. Every element served a purpose, nothing was wasted. And in that ecosystem of warmth, survival became symphony. But the real brilliance that lay in the forgotten techniques that blurred the line between physics and philosophy, methods so sophisticated, they almost feel alien today. Take the use of layered insulation within walls. In many northern European homes, builders stuffed the gaps between timber frames with mixtures of clay, straw, and wool. This wasn't just random filler. It was an early form of adaptive insulation. Clay retained heat, straw trapped air, and wool absorbed moisture without freezing. Combined, these materials created a thermal barrier that could rival modern wall cavities. And they were biodegradable, reusable, and sourced from within walking distance. Zero carbon footprint, maximum effect. And then there's thermal zoninga, concept modern architects champion, but which medieval villagers lived daily. Homes were divided not just by function, but by temperature. Outer rooms used for storage or cooking were allowed to be cold. Inner chambers, tightly sealed and closer to the hearth or animals, were the sanctuaries. People moved with the temperature gradient, like blood flowing to the body's core. One manuscript from 1294 describes cold spaces for waking, warm chambers for dreams. A poetic way of describing what we now call energy-efficient living. Even clothing was part of the heating system. Wool, yes, but not just any wool. In colder regions, garments were spun from lanolin-rich fleece, naturally water-repellent and heat-retaining. Outer layers were sometimes waxed with animal fats, creating a kind of medieval Gore-Tex. But the real secret lay in layering unlike those used by mountaineers today, a base linen layer wicked moisture, followed by tighter woven wool for warmth, and a loose overgarment to trap body heat. It was as if they understood convection without needing to name it. And yet, for all this brilliance, their knowledge was scattered, preserved in bits of parchment, hidden in the soot-darkened beams of abandoned homes, embedded in the wear patterns of ancient floor stones. It wasn't taught in schools. It wasn't patented. It lived in craft, in repetition, in generations of hands learning by doing, until the doing stopped. But if the methods were lost, the mindset is still recoverable. And in that mindset is something far more revolutionary than any thermostat. Consider how medieval builders interacted with the seasons themselves. Their homes weren't static boxers designed to be the same temperature year-round. They breathed with the earth's rhythms. Walls expanded and contracted. Roofs vented heat in summer and trapped it in winter. Even window shutters, so often seen as decorative, today were active thermal controls, opened or closed, not just for light, but for modulation. In some houses, shutters were lined with sheepskin or leather for added insulation. Not just furniture, but functional layers. One of the most haunting discoveries comes from a 14th century farmhouse unearthed in Denmark. Inside, archaeologists found not just the remains of hearthstones and animal enclosures, but a complete system of thermal pathways, narrow hallways, designed to channel heat from the center outward, like arteries delivering blood. It wasn't architecture, it was anatomy. The house lived and, in doing so, it kept its people alive. But perhaps the most symbolic innovation, the one that embodies everything about the medieval approach to heat, was the thermal bench. Picture a long wooden bench, situated beside the central hearth or in a sunlit alcove. Beneath it, layers of stone or packed earth, heated during the day, radiating warmth long into the night. Families would gather here not just to eat or rest, but to exchange stories, news, memory. These benches were the warmest place in the home, and also the most human. In their warmth was rooted the most forgotten heating method of all, togetherness. because the farther we drift from that, the colder we become. It's no coincidence that as our homes became more isolated, our methods of heating did too. We went from shared fires to individual radiators, from communal warming houses to silent, glowing thermostats. We mastered the art of heating spaces, but we forgot how to heat lives. And now, our systems flicker when the power grid fails. Our homes freeze if the gas line shuts down. Our warmth is conditional contingent on supply chains and subsidies, fossil fuels, and fragile infrastructure. We've built cathedrals of comfort, but they tremble in the wind. Meanwhile, the stone hearths of medieval Europe still stand cold now, but enduring. They whisper reminders of an older way, a slower way, a way where fire wasn't just fuel. It was ritual. It begs the question, in our quest to master the cold, did we lose the warmth that mattered most? Imagine, for a moment, what it would mean to reclaim even fragments of this knowledge. Not to abandon modern systems entirely, but to supplement them, to reintroduce communal spaces designed for warmth, to build homes that hold heat, not just fight its loss, to teach children how to wrap a heated stone, how to bank a fire, how to share warmth like bread. This isn't nostalgia. It's survival, not in the apocalyptic sense, but in the human sense. Because resilience isn't just about having more technology. Sometimes, it's about remembering what we already knew. A future shaped by ancient knowledge isn't regression, it's realignment. And if you close your eyes, you can almost feel it, the glow of a central hearth, the weight of wool on your shoulders, the murmur of neighbors sharing stories by a fire that never dies. The genius of the medieval world wasn't just in how it endured the cold, but in how it warmed the soul. And maybe that's the kind of heat we need now. Beneath the frostbitten silence of a medieval winter, when snow coated the timber-burnt villages like white ash and breath turned to smoke in the chill air, our ancestors faced a question more ancient than fire itself. How do you survive the cold without burning through every resource you own? We imagine the Middle Ages as a time of struggle, of men and women shivering beneath crude roofs, huddled in damp corners, desperately waiting for spring. But that image, familiar, even comforting in its simplicity, is a lie. Or at least, a half-truth, because the deeper you dig into the records, the ruins, the long-forgotten manuscripts, and the bones of ancient buildings, the more a different picture begins to emerge. One where intelligence, not just endurance, defined how people survived. One where entire communities, through ingenuity and observation, developed heating methods so effective that modern science is only just beginning to understand their full brilliance. Some of these methods were so intuitive, so perfectly integrated into the rhythms of medieval life, that they disappeared almost unnoticed, cast aside like old tools in the glow of industrial progress. But now, centuries later, they whisper again through the soot-streaked stones and the scorched hearths of forgotten homes. And what they tell us may just challenge everything we think we know about progress. At the heart of it all was the medieval hearth. More than just a place for fire, it was a machine, a carefully designed core that interacted with the architecture around it. These weren't the sidelined fireplaces we see in cottages today, meekly tucked into the corners of modern homes. No, these hearths were central, commanding attention, both architecturally and thermally. They sat in the middle of the main room like a sun in a miniature solar system. Thick stones beneath and around them absorbed heat like ancient batteries, slowly releasing warmth over hours, sometimes even into the next day. Archaeological studies of medieval homes in northern Europe revealed scorch marks and thermal imprints, proof that some hearthstones reached and sustained temperatures over 300 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to heat a home of 600 square feet. Without electricity, without insulation, without even a chimney. And here's the twist. The smoke, that thick aromatic veil we often associate with danger or discomfort, was part of the plan. Many homes had no chimneys. Instead, smoke crept upward, slowly weaving its way through roof slats or thatch. That might sound unpleasant, but the smoke served several purposes. It fumigated the timber, warding off insects that would destroy the beams. It preserved food hanging from the rafters. It even acted as a primitive air barrier, reducing heat loss. You weren't just living with the fire, you were living inside its system. But no matter how clever a single hearth might be, a lone fire is still lonely. That's where the communal flames came in. Scattered across Europe were warming houses, public hearths, fueled by shared effort and shared need. Village squares often had these heated shelters where people gathered, not just for warmth, but for gossip, trade, courtship, and counsel. These weren't just fires, they were the social engines of medieval life. Families took turns maintaining them, and during the coldest months, some were kept burning day and night, without pause, like a sacred flame. One warming house discovered in Bavaria showed signs of long-term fire exposure and seating. Arrangements for up to 50 people. Think about that, a structure, built in the 1300s. So perfectly positioned that smoke drifted away from main living areas, while heat gathered and lingered inside. No thermostats, no fans, just stone, fire, air, and community. And when community wasn't enough, when the walk was too far, or the wind too biting, individuals turned to portable solutions. Personal heating, a lost art in our era of plug-in comforts. They called them chauffees, hand warmers, hollow metal spheres, often pierced with intricate patterns, filled with glowing coals and slipped into pockets or sleeves. Some were made of iron, others of copper or even silver, status symbols, but also survival tools. In France, inventories from the 14th century list dozens of models, as if heating was already a consumer market. Pocket stones, too, were common. Smooth river rocks, heated by the fire, then wrapped in wool or linen and placed into boots, under cloaks, or even directly against the skin. They were cheap, efficient, and astonishingly effective. One account from 1422 tells of a man in Wales who was fined for stealing another's warmed stone during Mass. The penalty, providing heated stones to the congregation for the rest of winter. There's something almost sacred about that, a recognition that heat was more than comfort. It was life, and life had many forms. If you've ever wondered why medieval barns were built connected to houses, the answer isn't laziness, it's thermal logic. Livestock give off heat, lots of it. A single cow emits roughly 1,000 BTUs of body heat per hour. Now imagine 6 cows, a few sheep, a donkey or two, it adds up. Farmhouses were often designed with the animals on the north side, creating a natural barrier against the coldest winds. Shared walls allowed body heat to filter into the living spaces. Some homes were even built with raised floors over stables, allowing warmth to rise directly from below. A document from 1382 in Yorkshire describes the ideal heat-sharing arrangement, listing cows first, followed by pigs, sheep, and finally chickens, which apparently weren't great heaters, but made up for it in enthusiasm. It's easy to laugh now, but studies of surviving medieval longhouses show interior rooms adjacent to barns stayed up to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than isolated structures. No wires, no fossil fuels, just design and biology. But the real sorcery lay in how they amplified their fires. Reflectors, heat multipliers. Centuries before modern thermodynamics, these builders instinctively understood that metal could bounce. Warmth, polished copper sheets, brass panels, and silver-plated walls in wealthier homes all served as medieval radiators. Some halls featured curved backplates behind fireplaces, directing radiant heat outward in a broad arc. In France, the Château de Vincennes had a series of brass-lined fireplaces, capable of heating massive stone halls with surprising efficiency. When scientists recreated these systems in the early 2000s, they found that a curved reflector could increase perceived warmth in a room by up to 30%. One monastery in Germany used these so effectively that the infirmary reserved for the sick and dying stayed warm even during blizzards, thanks to what they called mirrors of God. And then, there were bed warmers. Long-handled pans filled with coals slid beneath sheets like ritual offerings. The pans themselves were often art engraved with blessings, prayers, even jokes. One from 1435 reads, "Sweet dreams, don't let the ice bite." Beneath the laughter, though, was precision. Only certain coals were used, low smoke, low flame, to reduce fire risk. In some towns, officials were assigned to inspect warming pan contents before curfew, because in a world of wood and wool, one ember could erase a village. They slept in canopy beds, not for luxury, but necessity. Curtains trapped heat, forming a cocoon of warmth around the sleeper. Some models included slots to insert hand warmers. Others had double layers of cloth, like a medieval insulation system. Testing on these beds today shows interior temperatures, up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit higher than the surrounding room. And still, the ingenuity didn't stop there. Builders turned to the skies. They studied the sun, not as something to worship, but as something to work with. South-facing windows, thick stone walls, angled beams, all designed to capture and hold daylight warmth. Archaeological data from southern England and northern France shows homes oriented precisely 17.5 degrees east of true south, perfect for maximizing solar heat in winter while avoiding excess in summer. Some castles had rooms with 6-foot thick walls built solely for heat retention. A study at Caerphilly Castle found that these sunrooms remained above freezing even when exterior temperatures dropped below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. But perhaps the most astonishing feat of all, hidden beneath floors and nearly forgotten, was radiant heating. Not Roman hypocausts, but their rural descendants. The stone pits, large stones, often weighing 30 pounds or more, were heated in the hearth, then moved beneath floorboards or into specially dug compartments under benches. They radiated warmth for up to 6 hours. One manor house in Kent documented a system where 24 stones were rotated in and out in shifts, each labeled with symbols indicating optimal use times. It wasn't central heating, it was cyclical warmth, guided by rhythm and ritual. The more you study the medieval world, not from the outside, but from inside its walls, beside its fires, beneath its thatched roofs, the more a strange realization begins to set in. We didn't just move forward, we moved away. away from rhythms that mirrored the seasons, away from materials that aged with grace, away from spaces that pulsed with human presence and breath. In chasing comfort, we may have traded something deeper, something the medieval world understood in its bones. Because warmth was never just about temperature, it was about meaning. There's a manuscript from 1411, tucked away in a French monastic archive, that describes how a winter guest should be welcomed. It details the lighting of a fire before their arrival, the warming of stones for their bed, and even which herbs to mix into the coals to scent the room: lavender, thyme, sometimes pine resin, not for health, not for show, but for the experience of being received with care. Fire wasn't just a utility, it was hospitality, an invitation, a presence. We've forgotten how to build that kind of presence, and yet, the clues still lie all around us in soot-smudged chimney bricks, in worn stone thresholds, in the thermal logic embedded in buildings centuries old. Take, for example, the passive solar design found in hilltop fortresses of southern France and northern Italy. Builders positioned structures along precise slopes, with thick southern-facing walls and minimal northern exposure. They weren't guessing, they were reading the sun, reading the wind, reading the land itself. Or consider the geothermal principles used by Scandinavian farmers who dug semi-subterranean homes into hillsides. The earth insulated them, the fires fed them, the animals breathed warmth into their walls. These weren't primitive shelters, they were systems, closed-loop cycles of heat and habit. Today, we spend billions trying to recreate what they achieved with stone, firewood, and intuition. And perhaps the most startling discovery: they knew they were doing it. This wasn't accidental genius. In village records, we find building contracts that specify heat retention, land deeds that note solar angles, even local laws that required certain homes to share walls for insulation. Yes, but also to maintain the neighborhood's collective warmth. It was codified, normal, expected. Contrast that with now: cities built without soul, homes designed without sun, lives lived apart, each behind their own glass wall, pumping out energy into the void. What happens when you heat a space, but not the people inside it? The medieval world would not have understood that question, because for them, the fire was central not just physically, but emotionally. The hearth was the altar of the household. It was where stories were told, bread was broken, wounds were tended. A place of communion, long before modern faith systems took over the language. And as fire shaped their homes, it also shaped their time. Because in those days, warmth was a process. You didn't flip a switch. You woke before dawn, banked the coals, stirred the embers, warmed the stones. You earned your heat, and in doing so, you measured your life in rhythms: dawn to dusk, fire to fire. Is it possible that we've lost something in gaining immediacy? Now, we chase constant temperature, climate control, smart thermostats, but in doing so, we've forgotten the gift of contrasted the sacredness of warmth after cold. The miracle of stepping into a room and feeling it breathe around you, not because of a machine, but because of how it was designed. That's what medieval people understood in ways we're only beginning to rediscover. That warmth, real warmth, doesn't just come from fire. It comes from how we build, from why we gather, from what we choose to remember. And what if this remembering isn't just historical, but necessary because the climate is changing? Winters are growing harsher in some regions, while fuel sources grow thinner. Energy costs rise, infrastructure strains. And somewhere between sustainability and survival, we may be forced to turn not backwards, but inward, toward the past, not for nostalgia, but for wisdom. Already, architects are revisiting medieval techniques: passive solar homes, thermal mass design, curved reflectors, communal heat hubs. Even modern eco-villages are reviving the idea of shared hearth spaces, hollowed chambers of warmth where people gather not just for efficiency, but for connection. And as we study these old methods with new eyes, something incredible happens. They work, not just in theory, in practice. In 2019, a group of engineers reconstructed a medieval-style home using only 14th century methods. No electricity, no insulation, just stone, timber, wool, and clever geometry. The result, a winter interior temperature of 67 degrees Fahrenheit, while outside dropped below 20. No gas, no grid, just design. It's enough to make you wonder, if they could do that 600 years ago, what's stopping us now? Maybe it's not technology we're missing. Maybe it's patience. Craft the humility to learn from the dead. Because if this script has uncovered anything, it's this. The medieval world wasn't a dark age. It was an age of firelight, glowing quietly in the corners of cold rooms. An age where knowledge was etched into the mortar of homes, not the margins of textbooks. An age where people knew that survival wasn't just about getting through winter, but doing it together, and that might be the lesson we need most now. Not just how to stay warm, but how to stay human. So next time you feel the cold creep in through the cracks in your window, or the silence of a lonely night, remember the stones. Remember the heart. Remember the wisdom of those who came before you, building with breath, with bone, with fire, because the past still burns, and sometimes, the oldest flame holds the brightest light.